The Seventh Tower by Garth Nix. Book 6, The Violet Keystone. Chapter 22. The Chamber of the Veil was similar to the room at the top of the Red Tower, only larger and more impressive. It had 4 wide arched windows that looked out to blue sky and sunshine. The floor was not checkered, but set with tiny sunstones that shone with a soft violet light that mixed with the golden sunshine. Tal and Mila came to it sooner than they expected, the corridor simply turning steeply and merging into the floor of the chamber. They ducked down as they saw the edge, then peered up over the lip of the ramp. There was no tree of bells, as in the Red Tower, Tal saw, but there was a somewhat similar pyramid-shaped plinth in the center of the chamber. Parts of it shone like a sunstone, in distinct colors. With a shock, Tal realized that the entire plinth was actually carved out of an enormous sunstone, one that must have had a diameter of 3 stretches or more. He didn't know you could carve a sunstone into any shape, let alone a pyramid. As Tal watched, the horizontal band of yellow light in the pyramid went dark, and he saw with a feeling of terror that this was a progressive darkness, and that more than half of this enormous sunstone had ceased to shine. 5 distinct bands were dark, from the base of the pyramid up, and only 2 still shone. Orange and red. Then Tal saw Sushin. The bloated chosen was on the far side of the pyramid, holding the violet keystone in his hand. He was sending pulses of violet into the pyramid, pulses that Tal instinctively knew were closing. No, what was the term the Codex had used? Shutting down the veil. Sushin's spirit shadow, a monster of spikes, with 4 hooked claws and 2 massive horns sprouting from its head, loomed up behind its master. But there were no other spirit shadows in the chamber, at least that Tal could see. He felt a rising hope build inside him. Sushin was a dangerous enemy, but he was alone. "Attack on 3?" he whispered to Mila, and she nodded. Tal saw that the talon on her hand was already glowing as she held it out from her body. Tal held up 3 fingers. Closed 1, his heart pounding. Closed 2, his heart going faster than it ever had before, red light pulsing in his sunstone. Closed 3. Go! Everything happened too quickly then. There was no time for thought, only instinct. Tal jumped forward and fired a red ray at the spirit shadow, because Sushin was protected by too many sunstones. It hit the thing between the eyes, and it reeled back, clasping its head with 2 hooked hands. Mila charged straight at Sushin, the talon fully extended, a long lash of light twisting and curling from it, as if it had a life of its own. Sushin didn't move. He stood there like a statue, the violet keystone on his finger continuing to pulse at the pyramid stone. The orange band of light went out. Sushin's spirit shadow dashed forward, only to be met by another red ray from Tal as he advanced. Adris and Audris zoomed ahead to grab the enemy spirit shadow. Mila struck at Sushin with the talon, and sunstones flared on every hem of his violet-colored robe. The lash of light from the talon was deflected, whipping back over Mila's head. Without a second thought, the Icecarl flipped a bone knife out of her sleeve and tried to stab Sushin with a more physical weapon. But the sunstones flared red, and the knife was burned away in an incandescent flash. Mila howled in fury and tried to punch the talon into Sushin's face. More sunstones flared, this time blue and green, and she found herself picked up by some unseen force and thrown over the chosen's head. Somersaulting in the air, she landed on her toes and rushed back as Tal ran forward to join her, half his mind focused on forming the beginnings of the violet unraveling in his sunstone. Mila struck again first, and was once more thrown aside by Sushin's defensive spells, sliding across the floor with an angry scream. On the other side of the chamber, Adris and Audris were twisting the spirit shadow's claws behind its back and holding it so it couldn't use its horns or teeth. Then they proceeded to tear it apart, bellowing and thundering with every wrench. "Stay clear!" shouted Tal. A violet cloud was spewing out of his half of the violet keystone. With a flick of his wrist, he sent it spinning into Sushin. Every sunstone on Sushin burst into brilliance as the violet unraveling hit. For a moment, it looked like they might resist it, or even turn it back. Then they started to explode, one by one, as the unraveling bit into them. Yet Sushin still didn't move, keeping his half of the violet keystone on the pyramid. Even as his last sunstone vaporized and the unraveling started to eat away at his clothes and exposed flesh, he did not look away or lower his hand. Then the last band of color in the pyramid went out. All 7 bands were dark. Sushin moved, swift as a cavern mouth, turning his part of the keystone back to bathe himself in violet light of a different shade from the unraveling. They canceled each other out in the very second that Tal and Mila attacked again. Tal's red ray was the strongest he'd ever dared, a finger-thin beam of vicious light aimed directly at Sushin's head. But Sushin caught it on his keystone, deflecting most of it to the ceiling, though his hand was burned. Mila came in low, sweeping the lash of light from the talon across Sushin's legs. With inhuman speed, Sushin countered with a shield of violet, but he was not quite fast enough, and the lash cut deeply into his legs, just above his ankles. As before, when Mila had thrown her Merwin horn sword at him, no blood came out of these wounds. But Sushin did fall to the ground, his hamstrings cut. He wriggled like a worm walker around the pyramid, shrieking as he scuttled. "No, it's not me! It's not me! Don't kill Sushin!" Then another voice came from somewhere inside him, a deeper, stranger voice, louder and more horrible than anything that came from any human mouth.
"You have lost. The veil is destroyed. The time of Sharakor has come."
Then it spoke a quick series of words that neither Tal nor Mila knew, but somehow still recognized.
"Navarth, Gesh,
Then it spoke words they did know, words that hit them like physical blows.
"Adras eres Einir, Odres eres Einir."
With those words, Adris and Audris disappeared. To Tal and Mila, it was like having something torn out of their bodies, a pain so terrible that both of them were instantly felled, toppling to the floor like chopped trees. Through a haze of crippling pain, Tal saw Sushin crawling back around the pyramid, crawling toward him. He tried to focus on his sunstone, but everything was blurry, and he could not make his hand do what he wanted. Mila tried too, and actually managed to drag herself closer to Tal and raise her hand with the talon. But no light whip came, and she could not keep going. All her strength was gone. They were dying, Tal realized, though he could not think clearly for the pain. This was what had happened to Ethar and the other chosen outside the audience chamber. Sushin, or whatever was in Sushin, had sent their spirit shadows back to Einir, and the sudden shock had killed them. "I shall take that," said Sushin in his normal voice as he crawled up next to Tal. One blubbery hand reached across and slid the violet keystone from Tal's finger. The chosen boy tried to resist, but it was no good. His arm just flopped, and the pain stabbed through his eyes into his brain. "I think this is best put back together." Sushin sat up and inspected the half keystone he had taken. But before he could slip it on his own finger next to the half he already had, a beam of intense red light shot out and struck him full on the hand. The keystone ring fell to the floor and bounced away. The voice inside Sushin growled then, a sound that drove fear even through the pain in Tal. Another red ray struck Sushin in the chest, smoke curling up as it drilled a hole right through him. He growled again and struggled to get to his feet, forgetting his hamstrings and bulk. He fell over again and started to slither along the ground like a snake or worm toward the pyramid. Through the deep cuts and rents in the chosen's robe, Tal saw not flesh and blood, but shadow. Tal rolled over, crying with the pain, and saw Crow standing near the entrance. The Freefolk boy was holding out his sunstone in the approved manner taught in the lectorium, his face wrinkled in concentration. Red light bathed his hand, growing in intensity as he prepared another red ray. A second later, it shot out, striking sparks as it cut through some metal on Sushin's robes. But it still did not slow whatever Sushin was. He reached the pyramid and dragged himself up, using it as a prop so he could aim his sunstone at Crow. Not a man, screamed Tal, the words interspersed with sobs. A shadow! Malin! He could say no more, his strength exhausted.